Okay, technical issues sorted.
All right, good morning. All right, so what?
What's your name, Rabbi? Introduce yourself. We are new here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. My name is Mandel Posner. It is good morning. What? No. Not yet. I'll let Livy answer. Anyways, okay. So, what? I know. I need to speak. I need to speak this. Okay.
Here we go.
Anyways, oh wow. Okay. Thank you. No pressure, right? Anyway, so after we like the Menorah, we're probably all familiar with a halacha that it says a woman, specifically it mentions the woman shouldn't do malacha from after you light the candles on the Menorah. There's different reasons brought, but I think just the simple reason brought in Shulchan Aruch is because the woman, because they were involved in the miracle of Hanukkah and singles them out, therefore they have this extra hinder. There's other reasons mentioned in other sources, but that's the reason given. What's the reason? What's the story that's referring to? It's the story of Yehudis. The Yehudis befriended one of the generals, and she got him a little sicker. He fell asleep, and she killed him, and that started pushing towards the victory. Yehudis was a part of the Hashmonaim family, either a daughter or a sibling to the Hashmonaim, and that's who she was. The story isn't recorded in any. It's not like a story from Nach. It's not like any. There's no Jewish source. It's really from a Greek source, but we have the story alluded to. The question is what Yehudis did. She befriended this general, a guy, and was that allowed? Is that something that's allowed? Let's just say in modern day times. So just going with Eretz Yisrael, the Mossad, the IDF, they have one recorded story that is, I guess, pretty famous, where Mordechai Vanunu, he came and he worked in Dimona, in Israel's nuclear plant. He snuck out photos of what he saw there, and he wanted to bring them to press, and Israel didn't want them to go to press, so they sent out a Mossad agent to also befriend him, and they got him out of, he was, I believe, in England. They brought him to another country. That way they could then bring him to Eretz Yisrael and to stand trial in the state of Israel. So the question is also what she did. She befriending him and in certain ways that could be halachically problematic. We know there's the three averes that Yarg v'layaver of Shvichas Damim, Avodah Zarah, and Gilui Arayis. So this story is fall under Gilui Arayis, and how could it do it? How is that allowed? Can't necessarily how could you do it? That's not our position maybe to be involved in, but is that allowed for them to do such an approach? There was also, I think about 10 years ago, where Gaza, they told their soldiers, be careful because the Israelis, the IDF is trying this tactic where they're going to send young female soldiers to try to befriend them also and try to use them as spies to bring back data to the intelligence. So the question is that allowed? Is that not allowed? In short, could you go against this avera of Gilui Arayis in order to save the Yidden? So the way halacha works, we have to go back, find the precedent to this case. And famously, we have the story of Esther. The Gemara in Sanhedrin asks, how could Esther go and be with Achashverosh? Each time he told her to come, seemingly it's not allowed, it's Gilui Arayis. And there's two answers. Abaye and Rava give an answer. Abaye says, Karka Elam. Karka Elam, she's just Karka Elam, which we'll explain in a second. And Rava says, because Achashverosh wasn't bringing her, when Achashverosh was with Esther, it wasn't something that he was doing because she's a Yid. He wasn't making her sort of say, denounce Yiddishkeit. It wasn't in the name of going against Yiddishkeit, and therefore it's allowed because he was just doing it for Hanois Atzmai, for his own personal pleasure. And in such a scenario, it's allowed. But both of these opinions, whether you say when a person's doing it for their personal pleasure and it's nothing to do with Yiddishkeit at stake, or if the woman is Karka Elam, both of these are mentioned by the Rif, and the Shach says because the Rif brings both of them, seemingly saying the halacha would follow either of these opinions. practically, most of what we're going to focus on is Karka Elam here. That Esther was Karka Elam. She was, I guess, just I don't know, she was completely limb. You know, she just was without any action. That's what we're going to focus on for most of today's year. So, what is Karka Elam? So yeah, who says they're gonna get information? Right. No, we'll touch it towards the end. If it's not a certainty that you're gonna get anything, but even with Esther, what was she getting? What was her certainty that she has?
Also the other way is like she's the first one to be fired. But it's not necessarily.
Yeah. So that's what we're gonna get to now. Karka Elam. So what is Karka Elam? So there's two definitions brought. Well, we'll focus on two for sure. One of them is the opinion of like the Ran brings that and the Ramban brings it, which is what Levi was just saying. That Karka Elam in the case of Esther, for example, it wasn't like Esther came to Achashverosh. We know there's only at one point the story changes where Esther comes to Achashverosh and it says in the Gemara, what was the whole big chiddush that she came to Achashverosh? Because that was the first time she was willingly coming to Achashverosh to be together with him. All the other times Achashverosh just forcibly brought her there. And that's what the Ran and the Ramban said. That's what Karka Elam is. Karka Elam is. That it's not that you make yourself Karka Elam, it's that you are made into Karka Elam, right? Who's causing the Karka Elam? In the story of Esther, according to the Ramban and the Ran, she didn't have to do anything. It wasn't really up to her. Achashverosh says come. If she doesn't just come and do what he says, he's not going to kill her otherwise. It's not do this or I'm going to kill you. He is going to do what he wants to do. He is doing what he plans on doing, and you basically go along with it. You're Karka Elam. You have no say in the matter. That's the approach of the Ran and the Ramban. The Rivam in Tosfos, the approach Tosfos takes is no. Karka Elam is that Esther is being forced to come, and now she has the ability to either be Karka Elam, I'm passively just going to be here, or she could play an active role. And that's the definition of Karka Elam. So we have these two opinions, which these now obviously are going to make a very big difference. These are going to make a very big difference in how things play out, which we'll get to in a second. But just to clarify this point of Tosfos, why, if someone makes themselves passive in Karka Elam, why is that suddenly allowed? So the reason is because we compare the two of Ritzicha and Gilei Arayos. By Ritzicha, if someone takes a person and says, Tosfos brings this as well, brought from the Gemara, that you take a person, you say, I'm going to use you as a human brick and throw you at someone, which is obviously going to kill them. In such a scenario, it says a child, which is obviously would make more sense. But in such a scenario, Tosfos says you're allowed to go along with it. Because what's the problem of Ritzicha? Ritzicha is that you're saying, I'm going to kill this person because I basically am better than them. Why should I get killed? Let me kill this other person. Let them go instead of me. But in such a scenario, right, we say, why is your blood any more red than theirs? You should let that person that's being put in this situation, let them get killed instead. However, in the case where a person is just playing a passive role, they're going to be thrown at this child. They don't need to stop and get killed. They could go along with whatever someone is doing to them. So now coming back to this scenario of Gilei Arayos, because we're in a scenario of Karka Elam as well, passive, I'm not going to be involved. I'm not going to tell you yes. I'm not going to tell you no. I will just be. In such a scenario, then the halacha would be that it's fine. Now, practically, we just gave two examples of Karka Elam. The Ramah brings this second one of Tosfos, that makes sense because the Ramah in general, right? We pass like the Ramah paskins like the Mordechai, and the Mordechai paskins typically this is paskins like the Tosfos. So we see the Tosfos brings this opinion of Karka Elam, this definition of being passive, and that's how the Ramah Taka says in the Yeridea that if someone is passive, then it is fine.
Something
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so taking that approach, that means that if you have these soldiers, so long they're being passive, then it's fine. They're allowed to do whatever they want to do. They're allowed to go and approach these, whatever. Let's just say people in Gaza. They're allowed to approach them and do whatever they want, so long that if they actually do any action, it's all with a passive in a passive way. But like Levi just said, that sounds a bit extreme to say, because you're not being so passive. It's like, you're instigating all the trouble, and when the teacher looks, you're suddenly a good boy, right? It doesn't really work that way. If these girls, these soldiers are instigating, and then suddenly when it comes time, like, when there's some sort of action, that they're going to be passive. How is that really considered passive, or is that considered passive? So could we apply the same logic of Esther? Okay, so again, we're trying to find precedent of saying if it's allowed or not allowed. We went to the story of Esther. Esther, let's just say it's allowed because karka elam, meaning she's completely passive. So therefore, it should be allowed. However, now we have this question: is this considered passive if they set up a whole storyline to get to this point? Is that still considered passive or not? So again, we're going to go to some shovas of more recent times. And what we're going to take, there's three approaches that we're going to look at. There's the Yehudis Yehuda, the Shvus Yaakov, and the Beis Yaakov, all of them right around the 1800s. No, the 17th, 18th century, so 16 or 1700s, that have stories that bring to light what should be, I guess, the modern day approach. And so the Shvus Yaakov has a story where there was a group of people going through a forest, and a bunch of men, and there was one woman with them. One of the men was her husband, and they get stopped and attacked by bandits. And the bandits basically say, we're going to kill you all and take your money, as was, I guess, common back in those days. So the woman, she gets permission from her husband, and she tells them, guys, instead of killing us and taking all our money, how about, I'll make myself available to you, leave us alone, let us continue on our way. And they agreed, and that's what happens. Now they come back from their journey that they were on, where they almost all lost their life. And now she comes to the Shvus Yaakov, and what is this? What she did? What's the deal? Was that allowed? Does she now have to get divorced from her husband? What happens now? So that again, now the Shvus Yaakov is left with finding precedent to the story. So he has the story of Esther. We have the story of Yehudis, which we don't really have any sources from that we can learn out of. We also have another story in Nath we have a story of Nath from Yael and Sisera. Right? Sisera was coming and to attack the Yidden. He had his whole army, and Yael saw him. She brought him into her tent, and she did the same. Pretty much the same. The story of Yehudis is very similar to that story. What? Huh? That's whatever. Okay. What? So right, she wasn't in the VC, but no, you're right. But on the flip side, also, technically, what? I don't know. Yeah, good question. I don't know. I'm not gonna say anything because I don't know. Okay, but here's three stories that we could, I guess, attempt to learn from. And the Shvus Yaakov brings from the Marik, who lived earlier in like the 1500s. He brings what the Marik's approach. The Marik says basically that because we're dealing with a case of karka elam, that because it's completely passive, and because also that you have you have many Yidden's lives involved, therefore it's fine to do it's fine to do what Esther did. That's what he brings in reference to Esther. And what? It's the same story pretty much as Yehudis. She brought his sister. She saw him coming back from while he was running away. She saw him. She brought him to her tent. He fell asleep and she decapitated him. So, but it's the same thing. She used herself and a friendship together with Maisa to bring about the downfall of Sisera. What? And so the Marik brings that in these situations, when you have Hatzalas Rabbim and passivity, it's allowed to do what she did. It's not the approach of everyone. For example, the Ran, he learns out, again, we're talking about, this is the sheet of Taisvis quoting the Rivam. The Ran learns the Rivam differently. He says that the Rivam's approach, that to say that Karka Ilam is passivity is only if it's completely passive, meaning being forced to do it and you can't instigate it at all. But going with the approach that Taisvis takes, what? The Ran, quoting the Rivam. So Taisvis quotes is bringing is the sheet of the Rivam. Ran, quoting the Rivam, says it's only if it's completely passive. But putting that aside and going with the approach that even, like the Marik explains it, that if it's completely passive and it's for Hatzalas Rabbim, will be allowed. And with this, there's basically three approaches. Each of those that we just quoted. So we'll start with, I guess, the most lenient is the Beis Yaakov. The Beis Yaakov has another question he was asked. I guess similar story, but similar concept, but different story. Where a man was, there was a man being threatened with his life that unless he's with such so and so Jewish lady that's married, they're going to kill him. And this woman took the approach of, okay, listen, his business is his business, but for her, she says, I'll be completely passive. So she basically allowed herself to be used for the sake of this guy. And like this, they wouldn't kill him. Why that's allowed, but let's just focus on what she did. So she comes now to the Beis Yaakov and asks if she is allowed to be together with her husband. In that situation, the Beis Yaakov, he's the most lenient of these three opinions, and he basically says it's fine. Why? Again, because she was completely passive and she did it to save someone's life. Okay. Going back to now to the Shvus Yaakov, where you have a whole group of people where this woman made herself available. He says over there that was allowed, but only because there was Hatzalas Rabbim. There were many people involved in being saved. So the Beis Yaakov says even if one person's life is going to be saved, being passive is enough to allow it. Shvus Yaakov says being passive is not enough of a grounds. There also has to be many people's lives at stake. And then we go to the third opinion of the Noda B'Yehuda. But before we go there, I just want one thing to further point out the difference between the Beis Yaakov and the Shvus Yaakov. The Beis Yaakov there says she doesn't need to get divorced. So what she did was allowed, and she's allowed to continue living with her husband as well afterward, which is extremely lenient opinion. The Shvus Yaakov says what she did was allowed, but now she has to divorce her husband because now she sort of say willingly was with these Goyim. Now she has to divorce her husband. So they're very far apart. The Beis Yaakov's reasoning is it's a bit of an interesting approach. He basically says that like we mentioned before, Esther, the whole time she was being forced, she was allowed. Then comes the one time she initiated her relationship with Achashverosh, and with Achashverosh, and now she should not be allowed to live anymore with Mordechai if afterwards if afterwards that works. Like afterwards if she would technically go back to him. The Beis Yaakov says that when Esther went to him, the Gemara says she was now making herself active player and forbidding herself to Mordechai. He says no. After the whole miracle of Purim happened, she retroactively became allowed to do what she did, and then she was still as if she was being forced. So now going back to Lev you asked before, in a case of if you're not sure if it's going to save someone or not. The Beis Yaakov takes the approach that, let's just say you're allowed to take the attempt to do this and save the day. Question is afterwards, is this woman forbidden to her husband? According to the Beis Yaakov, if, it depends on the outcome of the story. If you were successful and saved the day, yes. If not, then no, it will be problematic. But they still basically, you didn't get what you wanted to achieve. Now it's as if you actively were involved in this relationship. That's the approach he takes. Basically, really, you're not allowed to. But he takes the story of Esther, right? The Gemara says Esther, by going to Achashverosh, she's actively becoming a partner in it. So how could it be allowed? He takes the approach that basically, because it all worked out, so retroactively what she did was allowed. That's, I said before, it's a little bit of a stretch, I guess. Yeah.
How can we say, according to the opinion that have to be more than one life that you're saving? How can we say that? You're just going to say that the enemy comes to defend one life, save the whole nation. You can't give up that person, the whole world. We don't blame lives. Well, have any opinion that how many lives is saved?
So I could speculate. I can't give you a definitive answer, but
any amount is crazy.
over here, what we're looking for is to just say something off the cuff, or you can't just say. So you have to find a case, a scenario where this played out previously. That's the way halacha basically works. You're going to find a scenario where it was allowed. You might though be able to say is that why is it necessarily better that someone gets saved where someone is completely involved in Gilui Arayos? Meaning, if a person is in that situation, they would have to be killed. Is it actually better that so this person? Like I don't know. That's something that maybe to think about. So that's the approach of the Shvus Yaakov and the Beis Yaakov. The Noda B'Yehuda takes the most machmir approach. He basically says only Esther in her scenario was allowed. He brings a few things. First of all, he says that Mordechai and his bezdin told her to. It was sort of like a hirah shah. A one time, let's do this because we need to. It's also in that scenario, and he says there's a little bit of Ruach HaKodesh probably involved. That he takes that approach. He also says that even if Hatzalas Rabim is not enough. He says it has to be passive and Hatzalas Kol Yisrael. The Noda B'Yehuda says basically at that time all of the Yidden were under the jurisdiction of Achashverosh. If this goes south, we're talking about all the Yidden being wiped out. Therefore, it should be allowed. And we're not going to stop it. So he takes the most machmir approach. What? Allowed to do it in the first place. So it seems definitely from the Shvus Yaakov and the Noda B'Yehuda. Well, the Noda B'Yehuda, it's very hard to even get a scenario where it's allowed to happen. But it would seem, based on the Gemara, like we said, when we said that Esther became an active role in this relationship, that was when the first problem started. And going with the Shvus Yaakov approach, it seems like that seems like it's basically, most people will say it's for sure a problem. Only the Beis Yaakov takes that approach. It's you're quoting from two different sources. You're saying the Noda B'Yehuda's approach and the Beis Yaakov's answer. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like he's a little bit more out there, but I don't know. Those are basically the three approaches. Now, the only thing that some people have discussed is the Noda B'Yehuda's approach of saying there has to be all of Klal Yisrael. Why does it have to be all of Klal Yisrael? Is it so that there's a continuation of the Jewish nation, or is it more because of it says if all the Yidden would be killed, it would be a big Chilul Hashem, right? We have that when Moshe Rabbeinu uses that claim. If all the Yidden were to go, it looks bad for Hashem. It's a Chilul Hashem. And taking the approach of Chilul Hashem, some people basically want to argue that when you have, for example, let's just say the state of Israel, you have a lot of Yidden there. If something would happen drastic to the entire state of Israel, that's also a huge Chilul Hashem, and therefore even basically could sort of bend the rules even in the case of the Noda B'Yehuda. To summarize, basically, you have the case of is it allowed for a woman to be involved in a relationship to save the Yidden? We brought the story of Esther, and we said because she's going with the approach that she's karka elam, she's very passive. Then we questioned, is that allowed? Just being passive, even though you're instigating the story, which we brought three opinions. either pretty much completely allowed even to save one life, or allowed to save many if there's many lives at stake. And the third opinion, if it's only if there's saving all of the Yidden. The definition of that, maybe you could argue, but only if it's to save all of the Yidden would it be allowed. That, which would basically mean practically, there's definitely opinions to rely on that it would be allowed. However, it would seem that if a woman did do it, she would afterwards have to get divorced from her husband, and therefore it would be problematic. There is one more loophole where it could work. Gilei Arayis, what is the definition of Gilei Arayis? And there's Midaraisa, and then there's what the Chachamim added to that law. And Midaraisa, Gilei Arayis is only with a married woman, or if you're talking about like siblings, let's just say, right? That's straight up Minatayra Gilei Arayis. When it comes to other relationships, two single people, or if the girl is single and someone completely unrelated, it's Midrabanan, it's a problem, but not Midaraisa. And according to many opinions, the Yag V'Layavar only applies if you're going on a lot of Midaraisa. What? What? That's what I thought you were saying. Okay. Is that okay? Because that's a Chris? Huh? It is need to consider the Gileris. What? It's the Raisa, yeah. But is that part of them when it says Gileris, it's Yag V'Layavar, is that included? It's Isser Kars, correct. But I don't know, is that included in Yag V'Layavar? So it does depend. There are some opinions that say if there's Isser Kars, it could be a problem. I believe it, according to some, it's a problem. There's Midaraisa and Midarabanan. Midaraisa is the straight up problematic relationship is siblings or a married woman. A single apnuya, what? Yehudis, she's an almana. What? Correct. At the time she's married. Midaraisa, correct. That's the story of Yehudis, yeah. Esther, according to Midrashim, she's married. She's married to Mordechai. Fine. So that's basically the bottom line. If let's just put it this way: if the state of Israel had to do this tactic, then it should be with someone that's not married. Because then once you're done with someone that's not married, you have opinions to rely on that it's not Gilei Arayis, but it's not Yag V'Layavar. It's Gilei Arayis, but it's not Yag V'Layavar because it's only Midarabanan. And B, even if it's Midaraisa and it's Yag V'Layavar, you have the opinions of the Shvus Yaakov. You're saving now the whole nation, and possibly the Neiv Yehudis approach, and for sure the Beis Yaakov's approach. Then in such a scenario, it would be allowed. That's Nida is a fee of course. Yeah, but I believe that there are some things that do hold that if it's a forbidden relationship that either has misa or kares, could be problematic. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. And if it's kares, then Nida would fall under that category technically. I'm not 100% sure. This is like a lot of midrashim, man. That's like I don't know this much information. Some people say she cloned herself, whatever, and had a proxy. Like what? There's like I don't know. There's like it's not for a 5-minute. There's a lot you can look into. Yeah. There's no what? It's just passive. That's passive. The whole question of saving it for many people is her instigating, right? In those scenarios, you had the lady that the man was being threatened. She said, "Okay, I'll go along with it." She's somewhat going. She's not just being completely passive to just whatever, do what you want. In the case of the Shvus Yaakov, she offered these bandits, "Don't kill us. I'll make myself available." Right? So that's a case where she's not completely passive. If you're talking about a woman that's up against a knife, then yeah, that's completely passive. All right.